In this video, we will walk through some techniques so we can answer the question, what percentage of something accounts for something else? In our example, we will use a dataset about customers and sales. The strategy in this tutorial should work whether we're looking for 8% of sales or 80% of sales. In this tutorial, we are using the sample Superstore dataset that comes with your Tableau installation. It will be located in your My Tableau repository under Data Sources, and then the version of Tableau that you have, and the language or locale that you have. This should be this Excel file. Please be aware, however, that depending on which version of Tableau you have, you may get slightly different Superstore versions, which will have slightly different records. I've posted the Superstore Excel version that I'm using in the description below, so if you want to ensure you have the same version as me or compare with the numbers that I'm getting, please feel free to download the copy below. There are a lot of calculations involved in this tutorial. There are other ways of achieving the same calculations we have using Tableau Prep and then importing that into Tableau Desktop, but in this particular tutorial, we are going to do everything in Tableau Desktop. Please note that you may not need all the steps I outline in your own work or project. For this particular tutorial, I'm simply creating additional calculations so that we can help clarify and walk through what's happening as we develop our solution. Okay, so what do we need here? We're going to be using a parameter so that we are not hard coding what percentage we're looking for. We will also have a number of calculations ranging from basic row level calculations to aggregate calculations. There will be fixed LOD expressions, a number of table calculations where we manipulate both scope and direction. And in here, knowing the order of operations will be important. If you need a refresher on any of these topics, I have a number of other tutorials focusing on each individual topic. I've included some of the links in the description below if you're interested. So these are the steps that we're going to follow. First, we're going to set everything up. We're going to create the parameters and some fixed level of detail expressions. And then we're going to calculate focusing on sales. Here again, it's going to be a combination of LODs and table calculations. After we identify all of our sales values, we're going to focus on customers. We're going to start counting how many customers actually account for the sales that we've identified. And then step number 4 is really just more on the polish and the cleanup side. Let's go to the first step. First step, again, we're going to just set up our guideposts. We're going to create a parameter. We're going to calculate some of these numbers that will help guide our next steps. So here is our starter workbook. Let's start by creating a parameter. So in our question, we will ask how many customers account for what percent of sales. So let's make this into a parameter so that this is not hard-coded and we can always vary the question as we need it. So on the sidebar, in the dropdown, let's create a parameter. Let's call this percent of sales input. And a percentage is simply just going to be a float. Display format is going to be percentage. We don't care about the decimal places, so we're going to set the decimal places to 0. And in here, we're just going to leave it as all, which means it's going to be a text box and we can type in our value. Let's click OK. And now we can see that there's a brand new parameter section in our sidebar. We're going to simply display this, right click, show parameter. And let's move this parameter onto the left-hand side so we can reclaim a little bit of the space. Let's just change this right now to, let's say, 5% of sales. So in our input, let's just type in 0.05 for 5%. Let's also display this now in our title. Again, these are just our guideposts. So let's double click on this title. And in here, we're simply just going to replace this value with our parameter option. So insert our parameter, and we're going to remove that placeholder. Let's click OK. This is just a default behavior of Tableau. The moment you click OK, it kind of disappears. But then when you change the value, it actually will show up. So let's type in 0.06, and we have the 6% there. Let's also add this value to this other placeholder. So let's double click, change this, insert our parameter, and let's click OK, and there you go. So a few more values we need to know. First, what is our total number of sales? We're going to make this a fixed LOD because we want this to be constant. We want this number to not change even if we add some additional filters or additional dimensions or measures later on in our canvas. So again, on the dropdown, create calculated field. Let's call this one fixed total sales. And in here, because this is a grand total, it's not attached to any one dimension, we can simply use our curly brace and our aggregation. So we don't really need to type the word fixed in here anymore because it's a table scoped LOD. So in here, we're going to type in sum of sales. And okay, change the format, default properties, number format. This one is going to be a currency, 0 decimal places. The next number we're looking for is our target. So we're looking for what sales amount. Up until when do we count our customers? Well, in this case, it's going to be based on our input, and that's the percentage of sales. So we need to take our total sales times whatever this percentage is. So let's create another one, create calculated field. We're going to call this fixed target sales amount. And again, this is just going to be our fixed total sales times whatever our parameter value is. Let's click OK. And we can also change the default formatting. So right click, default properties, number format, currency, 0 decimal places, and OK. So let's display these two values for now. Select both, control click, and then put them under tooltip. And now let's add this to our title. So double click for total sales. This is going to be our total sales amount we are looking for. Insert target sales amount. And let's just add more context in here. This one is going to be the percentage of sales. So this is percent of sales. Let's click OK. So when we're looking for 6% of our sales out of our 2.3 million, we're looking for the customers that account for the first 139,000 of our sales. One more fixed LOD will be the total number of customers. So in here, another calculated field. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this fixed total number of customers. And we are going to base this on customer ID. So curly brace, count distinct of our customer ID. And then click OK. Let's add this as well. And let's update our title. So let's replace this. Total number of customers. Add this here as well. Insert total number of customers. And okay. So now we have our baseline. We know our total sales. We know what amount we're looking for based on an input. And we also know the total number of customers. So if our question was, what percent of customers account for 100% of our sales, then what we expect in here is 804. 804 customers account for the whole sales. Let's duplicate this worksheet and let's go to step number 2. So right click, duplicate. This one is step number 2. In this second step, we're going to focus on sales. We already identified our target amount. So what is the 6% of something? What is the 10% of something? We know that's going to be calculated in our worksheet already. But how do we get the customers who are included in this percentage? So in this next step, we are going to add additional calculations. Some important things to remember here. We're going to use a lot of table calculations. Specifically, we're going to be using running total and a secondary table calculation that gets the percent of total from that running total. And these all have to be locked to a specific dimension, which is our customer ID. So now we're back in Tableau. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move these calculations into their own folder just to organize this a little bit. So in the sidebar, let's group by folder. And let's add all 3 of these fixed values into a fixed values folder. So right click, folders, let's create a folder, and let's call this fixed values. Okay, so let's now set up our chart. Let's pull in our customer ID. Let's also add the sales. In here, let's just make it a default to show mark labels. In the toolbar, we can simply turn this on, the icon with a little T symbol. This is just for reference, so that we can always see what numbers we're working with. We don't need this in the final view or the final product. So in this particular bar chart, we're going to sort this descending. So hover over the axes and in here, sort descending. Here we can already see our top customers and their respective sales amounts. The next thing we're going to do is to add 2 more bar charts for visual reference. We're going to copy this pill, control drag over to its side, and the second pill will be a running total. So let's do that. So control drag, sum of sales. And in here on the drop down of the pill, we're going to add a quick table calculation and it's going to be a running total. So why do we need a running total? Again, there's a couple things that we've done. First, we added all of the customers and sorted this in descending fashion. So we're seeing the customers with the most sales first. And what we need to do is we kind of need to add all of their sales together. So cumulatively, if we added the sales of, let's say, the first 5 customers and we get the total, so again, if that total is about 88,000, what percentage of our 2.3 million is that 88,000? And again, this is what we need to work towards. In our case, right now I've actually set this up to 6%. If we're looking for 6% of the sales, which is about 139,000, visually speaking, we should be able to see approximately where it's going to land. So the 139,000 is probably going to be right around here. So it is below 141,000, so we're not going to include this customer right there. But anything above, these are the customers that make up or that contribute to 6% of your biggest sales. And again, right now, you can already see how this is going to work. Well, we're just simply going to count all the customers that are contributing towards this approximately 6% of your sales. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. But we are jumping ahead. Instead of doing the mental math, we can let our table calculations do the work for us. So I'm going to duplicate the second sales pill. Again, in here, just a control drag or a command click drag if you're using a Mac. And for the second one, we can add another table calculation on top of our running total table calculation. This is called a secondary table calculation. So again, let's copy this over first. And on the drop down of the third sales pill, we're going to edit the table calculation. And in here, we can add a secondary calculation. Now, what's also important, right now it is table down just because this is how our view works. But eventually, if you do need to move some of your fields around, it is important that we're going to lock the calculation to the customer ID. These calculations are dependent on the customer ID, on the customers that have the most sales first, all the way to the customers that have the least sales. So let's change this to specific dimensions. We're going to add our secondary table calculation. So let's click on that. And in the secondary table calculation, we're going to use percent of total. And again, we're going to lock this to our customer ID. Let's close. Again, just a visual check. We're looking for 6% of our sales, and that's 139,000. And in here, we can already see where 6% falls. So there's this line that's 557 and 6.09. And again, we've identified that in our amounts. So 129,000 and 141,000. So anything above the line is really the customers that we're looking for. We'll do one more here before we move on to step number 3, where we actually count the customers. So right now, again, just as a visual check or a visual cue, I'm going to add one more calculated field that allows us to see customers that are part of this range and customers that are outside the range. So create one more calculated field. Let's call this within range. So ideally speaking, we should be able to just take the third pill, drag it over, and see if our percentage is less than or equal to whatever we have in our parameter. That's the ideal scenario. However, right now, you are going to encounter an issue with the secondary table calculation. So in this particular case, if I drag that over, I'm going to get an unexpected error. It tells me that I can't really quite use a field that has a secondary table calculation in my calculated field editor. Now, the way around this is we know how to get to these numbers. It is simply the running total value divided by our fixed LOD. So we'll just do that. So how do we know if it's within range? Well, if it's the running total of sales, so we can use that, divided by our fixed LOD, if it's less than or equal to our parameter, then we know it's within the range that we're looking for. So let's drag the second pill over, divided by our fixed LOD total sales. So it's this, whatever the result is, if it's less than or equal to our parameter value. So drag our parameter value over. I'm going to keep the window here. I'm going to click on apply first. If we add this now to our caller marks card, then we can see visually which customers are part of the range and which customers are not part of the range. So let's target the all marks card, put within range in color. And again, visually speaking, we can see anything that's in orange. These are the customers that contribute to this percentage, and all the other customers, they will have a different color. Let's close this and let's duplicate this worksheet for step number 3. So right click, duplicate. This is going to be step number 3. We already have most of the pieces in place. So step number 3 is focusing on counting the customers. Right now, we can see visually, we can probably manually count, but that's going to be very tedious. And what if we're looking for 80% of the sales and we're counting more than a few hundred customers? That's going to be hard. So we want this to be as clear and as easy as possible. We want to count that automatically and just display that in our title. So we're now back in Tableau. Let's remove this color legend so we can reclaim a little bit of the space. We're also just going to add a couple of fields to let us visualize exactly how we're going to automatically count the customers. So first, I'm going to create a calculated field, and I'm just going to call this number, which is going to use the table calculation function index. If we take a look at the documentation for index, let's minimize this. And if we expand our documentation, this tells us that the index returns the index of the current row in the partition. And in essence, in our view, it's just going to be a sequential number. So let's click on OK, and we're going to display this. We're going to change this field into discrete and move it to the left of our customer ID. So on the drop down, we have to make this discrete, otherwise we can't put it to the left of a dimension. And in here, we're simply just going to move it to the left of our customer ID. And again, right now, visually speaking, we know that we are considering 8 out of our 804 customers. Now, if we weren't using a lot of aggregates and if we weren't using a lot of table calculations, the logical way to count our customer ID would be something like this. So let me just create a calculated field right now. It would be a count distinct of a customer ID. However, this doesn't quite work. We've already introduced a number of table calculations. So right now, what we need to use is a table calculation function, but a table calculation function can only accept an aggregation. So I can't pass in a customer ID because a customer ID, it's a row level field. And this is where we can use functions like min or max or attr or attribute. So let's close this first. Let's understand the first customer first. If I click on this and view the underlying data, so let's click this one, we know that one field is made up of 15 rows, but those 15 rows, they have exactly the same customer ID. If we were to pass this group to a function called attr or attribute, it is going to return exactly the same value. However, if it so happens that there is a different customer ID somewhere in here, what attr will return is going to be an asterisk. Again, the only reason we're doing this is so that we can use this within our table calculation. So let's close this. And again, just to demonstrate, I'm going to create an ad hoc calculation right beside rows. I'm going to double click, type in attr customer ID and close attr customer ID. And that customer ID, it produces exactly the same value. And again, the reason we need this is because of the table calculation. So now let's count. So on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's call this within range number of customers. We're simply going to say if it's within range. Remember, we created this calculated field before. This is the one that's driving our caller right now. We're simply just going to say then attr customer ID and then end. Right now, we don't see any errors because we've already taken into consideration that within range already uses table calculations and aggregations. However, just to show you that there's going to be an error, if I remove this and just simply type in customer ID, we're going to see this error. You can't mix and match aggregate and non-aggregate fields within the same calculated field. So let's just undo this and add attr again. What we want to do is we want to count everyone within the range. So that is a table calculation function. We can use the window count function. So in here, let's introduce window underscore count. Let's close this. Table calculations, they are going to be influenced by scope and direction. Right now, we only have a single scope. It's going to be table scoped. The direction is also just going to be table down. However, in your final view, if you decide to move things around, you need to make sure that you adjust your table calculations as well. So right now, let's click on OK. And let's display this within range number of customers. Let's display that. Let's go back to our all marks card. Let's put that in our tooltip. And let's add this to our title now. So in our title, double click. So how many customers? We're going to change this placeholder and we're instead going to insert the within range number of customers. Let's click on apply and OK. Now we can see the 8 out of 804. These are the ones that account for 6% of our sales. Now we also want to calculate what percentage of the customers this is. And we can already see the pieces in play. You have 8 divided by 804. That should determine the percentage. So yet one more calculated field on the drop down, create calculated field. Let's keep the naming consistent. Let's call this within range. And this is percent of customers. And this is simply going to be the within range number of customers divided by our total number of customers. Let's click OK. Change the default property, right-click, default properties, number format. It's going to be a percentage, 0 decimal places. Let's add this to our tooltip. And we're also going to add this to the final placeholder. So double-click in here. Let's insert our within range % of customers. Let's click on apply and OK. So just as a quick visual check, 8 divided by 804, so 1% of our customers account for 6% of our sales. Let's vary the input a little bit. Let me move our parameter back to the right-hand side. How about let's look for 50% of our sales? Let's change our parameter input to 0.5. So 50% of our sales is going to be half of our total sales. And it looks like 21% of our customers account for 50% of our sales. And a quick math check, 169 divided by 804 should be 21%. Let's do one more. Let's scroll down and let's look for 80% of our sales. Scroll back. Here we go. How many customers account for 80% of our sales? If we take a look at this, it means that technically we're stopping at 395. And 395 divided by 804 should be 49%. If this worksheet is correct, when we change the sales input to 80%, the worksheet should report 395 customers. So let's give this a try. 0.8, 395, 395, and that's 49% of our sales. And step number 4 is really just cleaning up the worksheet. Again, I've introduced a lot of extra fields that you're not going to need in your final view. And the only reason these are introduced is sometimes it's easier to step through the problem so that you can see how the numbers change one by one instead of seeing how the numbers have changed after 10 things have happened between. Let's duplicate this worksheet. Duplicate. Let's call this step 4. So in here, let's start by removing the extra fields. We're not going to need the extra 2 bars, and those are those 2 extra pills right there. So let's remove this and this one. Let's remove the extra customer ID as well. So let's remove that. We can keep the number. We could decide to adjust the title as well. Right now, these 2 lines seem a little bit redundant, so we can just remove that first question. Just double click, remove the first one. Let's click OK. Now, if you don't want to show all customers all the time, then you can simply use within range in your filter. Now, within range has a table calculation, so it shouldn't affect some of the other calculations we already have in this view. If you need a refresher on order of operations, I do have a video that goes into more detail about order of operations and what could be unexpected results if we're not keeping this in mind. So right now, if we drag within range onto filter and we leave only true, and let's say we make some changes, we're only looking for everyone who contributes to 5% of our sales, 0.05, then we don't see all of the other customers as well. And if we wanted to, we can also add our customer name. So drag customer name over, and you can also make adjustments to the lines, the borders, and the color. And there you go. And that's it for this tutorial. The video is longer because I wanted to step through each of the components, show you exactly how things change, and explain some of the pieces. Personally, for me, it helps me understand what's happening when I take things step by step. So I hope this strategy has been helpful to you as well. Thank you again so much for your time and support. I appreciate it. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you again in the next video.